I was on the other
Ik
side,
was aan de andere
where there
kant,
exists
waar
neither
geen tijd
time
en
nor
ruimte bestaat.
space. I felt I let
Voelde
go
dat
of
mijn
my
lichaam
body
losliet
and
en
began
begon
rising
omhoog te
up
stijgen
and got a feeling
en
of
kreeg een
peace
gevoel
that I never
van
knew
vrede
while on
dat ik op
earth.
aarde nooit gekend
I
had.
floated with tremendous speed
Ik zweefde met een
through a
enorme
spiral
snelheid
funnel.
door een
At the
spiraal van
higher
voortdrechten.
I rose,
En hoe
the
verder en
more the
hoger ik
darkness
kwam,
changed
hoe
into
meer de
light.
donkerte veranderde in licht.
An overwhelming
Een
feeling
alles
of love
overweldigend
came over
gevoel
me.
van liefde kwam over
Not
mij.
the earthly
Een
feeling
aards
that
gevoel,
I knew well too,
niet het aardse gevoel
but
dat ik ook
something
goed
I
kende,
cannot
maar
describe.
iets dat ik niet beschrijven kan.
In this lecture, we
In
will
deze
go and
lezing
have a
gaan we
look at
kijken
what
wat
happens
er
to
met
our
ons bewustzijn
consciousness
gebeurt
in the
voor,
dying process,
tijdens en na het
before,
sterven.
during and afterwards.
Wat ik zojuist voorlas
What I
waren
just
twee
read to you are two quotations of
citaten van
persons
mensen die een bijna
who have
doodervaring
had
hebben
a
gehad.
near-death
En
experience.
wat er tijdens zo'n bijna
The exact
doodervaring
occurrences
gebeurt,
during such a near-death
zullen we zo
experience
bespreken,
we will
samen met nog
presently
wat
discuss,
bijzondere
together
gevallen
with some
rond
other
het
special
natuurlijke
cases in the
stervingsproces.
natural dying process.
Maar om dit goed te kunnen plaatsen, gaan we
However,
eerst
to get a
kijken
clear
hoe dit
vision,
natuurlijke
we
proces
first will
verloopt,
take a look how the
zoals de meeste
process
mensen
takes
dit
its
doormaken.
normal course, how this comes to pass for most people.
Gisteren hebben we u verteld
Yesterday
dat
we
de
told you
bewustzijnscyclus
consciousness
actief en passief
cyclically
is. In de actieve
in a phase of
fase
activity
manifesteert het
and in the
zich
state
op
of
het uiterlijke
passivity.
gebied om ervaring op te doen.
In the active phase,
Waarna het zich
consciousness
weer
manifests
terugtrekt naar
itself
de
in
innerlijke
the
gebieden
external
voor een periode
sphere
van
to
rust.
acquire experiences, after
Een
which it
universeel
withdraws
cyclisch
to the inner
proces
realms
dat bij
for a
mensen
period of
reïncarnatie wordt
rest.
genoemd
A
en
universal
letterlijk
cyclic
wedervleeswording
process,
betekent.
which for human beings is called
We gaan
reincarnation,
nu dit proces
literally
doorlopen,
meaning
waarbij we
becoming
antwoord
flesh
zullen
again.
geven op de volgende vragen.
What
Wat
do we
laten we
leave
achter bij het
behind at
sterven?
dying? What do we take
Wat
along,
nemen we
or in
mee,
other words,
oftewel
who
wie
or
of
what
wat
is it that
reïncarneert er?
reincarnates? What will we
Wat
meet
komen we
after
tegen
death?
na de dood?
Why do we not remember
En
death
waarom hebben we geen
consciously?
bewuste herinneringen aan de dood?
We now will run over the
We
cycle
doorlopen
of
deze
reincarnation
reïncarnatiecyclus
from the
aan de hand
following
van de
outline.
volgende schematische voorstelling.
At the end of life, we
Tegen
often
het einde
see
van het
that matters
leven
of
zien we
material
vaak dat de
character become
materiële
more and
zaken
more
van
of
waarde
little
verliezen.
value.
We maken ons
We
wat
do not
minder
bother
druk
much about
om
externals,
uiterlijke
and we
dingen
may appear a
en
little
we kunnen wat
absent-minded
afwezig
from
lijken
time to
voor de
time.
omgeving.
These are
Dit is
signs
een teken
consciousness
dat
is
de
shifting its
gerichtheid van
direction,
het bewustzijn
its
begint te
orientation,
verschuiven naar de
to the
meer
more
innerlijke gebieden.
inner realms.
We worden vaak wat
We may grow
vergeetachtig, maar met
forgetful,
name
but this
wat
is
betreft
mostly as far as
dagelijkse
everyday
oppervlakkige
superficial matters are
gebeurtenissen,
concerned,
terwijl
while at the
belangrijke
same
momenten uit
time
het verleden
important
juist meer
events from
aangehaald
the
worden.
past are more and more being raised.
Zijn we onmiddellijk dat we komen te overlijden, zijn we onmiddellijk in een
At the
toestand van
moment of
complete en
death, we are
vredige bewusteloosheid.
Now at the
Waarna
instant
zich
of
een
death,
proces voordoet dat
we
ook wel
immediately are in a
panoramisch
state
visioen
of
wordt genoemd.
complete and peaceful unconsciousness, after
Gedurende
which
enkele
moment
uren
a
vanaf de
process
laatste
takes place
harteklop
called the
zien we
panoramic
ons gehele
vision.
leven in een
During
zeer verkorte
several
tijd
hours
voorbij
from the
trekken.
last heartbeat, we see
Het
in a
persoonlijk
very short
bewustzijn
time our whole
verenigt zich
life
tijdelijk met
passing
het
before
hogere
the
zelf
mind's
en
eye.
ziet zijn
The
afgelopen leven
personal
op aarde,
consciousness
de rol die
unites
hij gespeeld
temporarily
heeft.
with the higher self
Hij
and
overziet
oversees
welke
his
oorzaken
life
geleid hebben
just
tot een
ended on
bepaalde
earth,
situatie
the role he played.
en
He
ervaart daar
sees
de
what
volstrekte
causes have
rechtvaardigheid
led to
van.
a certain situation and he
Het is
experiences
een
the
zeer
absolute
belangrijk
justice
proces
of it.
waarbij alle waardevolle
This is a
levenslessen
very important
en
process
ethische
in which all
consequenties van de
valuable
keuzes van
lessons
het
of life
afgelopen
and
leven
ethical
worden geoogst.
consequences of the choices
Het is
of the
daarom
past
ook
life are
raadzaam iemand
harvested.
die net
For this
overleden is
reason it is
enkele uren
advisable to
ongestoord te
leave
laten,
someone
zodat dit
undisturbed for
belangrijke
several
proces
hours
zich
after
in alle
dying,
rust kan voltrekken.
so this important process can be quietly carried out. The stream of consciousness is
De
withdrawn
stroom
from
van
the
bewustzijn
body
is na de
definitely
panoramisch
after
visioen
this
definitief
panoramic
uit het lichaam
vision,
getrokken,
which makes the death
waarmee de
complete.
dood volledig is.
Again, there is total
Er is vervolgens weer sprake van een
unself-consciousness.
totale
For just as we do not self-consciously fall asleep, we do not self-consciously die.
we recover to some vague form
We
of
komen weer tot
consciousness in
enige vage
Kamaloka,
vorm
a
van
sphere or
bewustzijn in
state where all
Kamaloka.
our personal
Een
tendencies and
gebied of
desires
toestand waar
are
al
worked
onze
out.
persoonlijke
Kamaloka
begeerten en
literally means world of
uitwerkingen
desire.
hebben. Kamaloka
We find
betekent letterlijk
ourselves
begeerteplaats.
now on the astral
We
plane as
bevinden ons
discussed
nu in
yesterday,
het astrale gebied waar we gisteren ook over hebben
which is
gesproken.
slightly more
Dat net
ethereal
iets
than our outer
etherischer is dan
world.
onze uiterlijke wereld.
Our world
En waar
where
onze
our
persoonlijke
personal emotions
emoties
and
en
desires
verlangens
are
geroot
rooted.
zijn.
A spiritually oriented person will pass this plane rather quickly through and will not experience this plane consciously, because it has little attraction to it. But insofar someone has strong personal wishes and worldly desires, dwelling on this plane will take longer, simply because more time is needed before all this energy has been elaborated and released. We have now answered the first question: what do we leave behind at dying? These are all the lower personally oriented characteristics of man. It is that part of us that lives in the illusion of being separated from all other beings, an illusion we produce by identifying ourselves with the externally oriented existence of the senses. Now that we have left behind our low mortal part, we enter into a state where we actually come to rest. It is a spiritual state, also called Devachan, in which the higher part of personal man assimilates all spiritual lessons and experiences of the past life. As in Kamaloka, all lower tendencies and desires were worked out, and experiences of the past life, all lower tendencies are worked out and released. In Devachan, all lofty longings and ideals are relived and woven into our character. No aspirations not completely fulfilled in the life just closed we see realized in Devachan in all possible ways. So it is certainly a state of indescribable bliss and peace. Although this is illusory, in part because it's a self-created spiritual dream world, it is described as being far more real than anything we can experience here on earth. Finally, after all our ideals are relieved and assimilated, we lose attraction to this state, spiritual state, and we are drawn back to the earthly life, and we are familiar. Once we leave Devachan, we recollect the building blocks of our lower nature, not only the physical building blocks, but also our inclinations, desires, and other characteristics. Upon reaching adulthood, we have recollected all our building blocks and we continue where we left off.
So the answer to the second question, who or what is it that reincarnates, will be the spiritual man, existing of all the impersonal, noble characteristic, focused on unity of all life. This is the immortal part of us, that life after life reincarnates, and for this reason also is called the reincarnating ego. Therefore, death and birth are just transitions of states of consciousness, consciousness which is imperishable in essence. Dying could be seen as leaving your old worn coat. It's a liberation of the inner man, who is no longer restricted by the outer body. During this process, we pass through different states, we yesterday in the third lecture already have described. When we die, we make a transition from the waking state into the dreaming states in Kamaloka and Devachan. The latter may be having the character of a dreamless sleep. Every moment, as we have seen, we are surrounded by our own inclinations, thoughts and ideals. The answer to the third question, what do we meet after death, will of course be ourselves, nothing more and nothing less. What we focus on during life and put energy in is what will be walked out after death. Therefore there is no reason to be afraid for the so-called unknown, because it is precisely the well-known that we are going through and indeed already have gone through countless times. This also means that we affect the situation we find ourselves in after death, and that hold we can have now. We can now choose with our free will what we focus on, or as the previous lecturer has just told, what we resonate with. Finally, the last question, why then do we not remember death consciously? The reason for this is that we do not sufficiently live in our higher nature. our permanent part. We simply still have too little affinity with this level of consciousness to perceive and learn there self-consciously. We identify ourselves in our present stage of development with our lower, transitory part, and it is this part that disintegrates at death, including the physical brain, which is linked to our personal memories and impressions of the past life. However, this does not mean that we do not remember anything from our past lives, but more on that presently by Barend Voorham.
Now we have gone through the process of dying globally, as Theosophy teaches this from the principle and the perspective of consciousness. We want to look at some exceptional circumstances surrounding the process of dying. Situations we think that can better be explained in this light than following a purely materialistic vision. At first, two situations, persons in coma, a near-death experience, and NDE, and to perceive without brain activity. Something has been touched on this yesterday as well. Then we will talk about dementia, as also touched on yesterday, in relation to the dying process. And finally, related to dementia, terminal lucidity, the phenomenon of a clear consciousness just before dying. First, two situations possible with persons in coma. Coma usually is the result of severe brain damage, as a result of an accident, a lack of oxygen, or a stroke, for example. Virtually all the activities of the brain are stopped, and on the outside we see someone who is in a deep sleep, which is also the original meaning of the classical Greek word coma. In case the coma patient is kept alive artificially and if no longer a brain activity can be measured, we speak about brain death. NDE. It sometimes happens to people awakening from a coma that they experience something that is by now known by the common name NDE, near-death experience. An experience so special that it has a profound life-changing consequence for those who have experienced it. The grandeur and the intensity of it, as was shown in the citations at the beginning, is impossible to express in words. Some distinctive elements, mentioned in almost all cases, are a review on life, the experience of being outside of the body, passing through a funnel or a tunnel of light with bright light at the end of it, and experiencing an overwhelming feeling of intense peace and unconditional love, or even an experience of unity. Now, what exactly happens to someone who has a near-death experience? It is exactly, as the term implies, an experience on the verge of death. It is the beginning, the entrance of the dying process, the human mind withdrawal to more inner areas, but with the essential difference that the connections with the body are not completely severed and disrupted. The perceiving consciousness is that of the personal man who, on the astral plane, apart from the body and without the filter of the brain, acquires this overwhelming experience, but altogether still colored by the personality. It is the daily me, the interpreter of the experiences in the dreaming state. And this is precisely the reason why a religious person claims to have seen God. An atheist will only see a white light, someone who is a deceased loved one sees the loved one. These interpretations depend on the faith or belief. Therefore, this is not the real panoramic vision that we see from our higher self when we die. At most, it's a tasting at the start of the actual process of dying, a slight lifting of the veil, and just think that even this slight lifting cannot be expressed in words. In a near-death experience, the lower part remains intact, complete. The experience can be retold, even though never to its full extent. The brain as a vehicle of physical memory is simply too limited for the transmission of the intense experience that has been acquired outside of this limited apparatus. Literature describes thousands of cases all over the world, time and again, with the same recurring characteristics, only differently interpreted by the person who had the experience. That depends on his or her culture. An example that is interesting in the context of this symposium is the neuroscientist Ibn Alexander, also mentioned yesterday, a scientist who completely changed his life because he had a near-death experience himself. He has written a book about this titled After Life, After This Life, which has recently been released. Like many medical scientists, he defended the view that consciousness is the product of the brain. But his own experience, he now knows that it is the other way around. Ever since, he states, he has but one mission: to unite science with spirituality, not as two separate issues, but as integrally completed.
Another phenomenon that can occur to people awakening from a coma is the fact they have been observing their own life-saving surgery operation, or the fact they can describe events that occurred around their beds. This can also happen to coma patients who show no brain activity, something quite impossible to have come to pass according to all the people who assume that we are our brains. The brain cannot have been the observer at that time. In his book Infinite Consciousness, cardiologist Pim van Lommel quotes the example of a woman who was brain dead, but after having been in coma for months, could tell literally she had heard the doctor say around her bed. During the coma, there is a being awake on the astral plane. These are people who find themselves in the condition they self-consciously perceive the astral plane and manage to keep a hold on this after waking up from their coma. Just like we have our physical senses on this level, we have them on the astral plane, just as the same. Moreover, people who have had such an experience declare their perception was of such a clearness and accuracy that they never knew possible for their physical senses. An important conclusion we can draw from this is that brain death is not the same as death. At the very least, caution is required when no brain activity can be measured. It is by no means proof that the true man, the reincarnating ego, has truly departed. Because we cannot perceive from the outside the exact moment in which the connection to the body is finally broken. At the moment, brain death and actual death are still legally equated, with all the possible consequences. About 2 years ago, for example, considerable commotion arose in Denmark after a young woman was hit by a serious accident, got in a coma, and was declared brain dead. Doctors were about to transplant her organs, but at the moment she was disconnected from the heart-lung machine, she showed capable of breathing independently. 10 days later she was back home, and a few months later she rode her horse as usual.
Seemingly less directly related to the process of death is dementia, a common disease which it becomes more serious as death approaches, but can start many years before death. That's why I say apparently, because you might wonder what is the relationship between the loss of intellectual abilities years before the actual dying. According to Theosophy, this is totally related, as we will try to make clear in the following. Dementia is an umbrella term for more than over 50 different diseases, including Alzheimer's disease as the most common. The current medical view on dementia is that it is a combination of multiple disorders and mental disabilities, including memory, mood, behavior as a result of various brain diseases. Theosophy explains the loss of intellectual abilities differently. Taking consciousness as force behind all, she explains to put the cause there. The withdrawal of the thinking consciousness causes the cause of possibility to express one's and accordance to one's intellectual abilities. The eventual effect is decay of the brain, because less use is made of the brain as a vehicle of the thinking consciousness, just as the muscle power decreases when muscles are not trained. Brain's disease when not used. The faculty of thought and reflection is still there, but has retired to a larger or lesser extent. Only the more vegetative consciousness remains connected to the body, which does not die for that. The reason behind the withdrawal of thinking consciousess shows precisely why dementia has everything to do with death. In the natural process of dying, the consciousness withdraws at the time that the body has been worn out. Both events coincide at the time of death. In the case of dementia, something else happens. The thinking consciousness of man withdraws prematurely to more inner spheres, while the body is not yet worn out. The result is a separation of the vehicle, without the link being completely broken. The higher aspects that make us a human being can no longer express themselves through the brain. The person who suffers from dementia only reacts instinctively. "It is no longer my mother," can often be heard from the environment. Nevertheless, the true human being is still there, in the background, but nonetheless still present. In a moment, we'll discuss this a bit more in depth when talking about the phenomenon of terminal lucidity. What is the cause of the premature withdrawal of the higher man? Again, this is due to our consciousness, our own thinking. It is a disaccord, a disharmony, arising in this or any previous life by neglect of our own thinking. When we no longer pay any attention to certain aspects of our thinking, this creates a hitch or stagnation in the stream of consciousness, and the stream of consciousness cannot flow fully, with the consequence that the thinking consciousness eventually will withdraw and won't be able to express itself through the vehicle. However, we cannot generalize. It could be caused in a previous or in this life. The fact that the cause lies in our own thinking also means that we can avoid this with our thinking. Dementia, therefore, is absolutely not something that is part of life. It is an imbalance which could be prevented by means of the harmonious orientation and control of the thinking mind. How this process works, we can recognize in our own environment. Identify yourself, for instance, with just your body without any other interests. Then there's little left when the body decays. The same applies to an employee who sees work in life as his only drive, has no other interest, and no longer keeps a deeper meaning in life up and living in his mind. After his retirement, there remains a void. It doesn't matter to me anymore. Without any meaningful use of the valuable time, the exercise of the brain stops.
Hence, develop all aspects that you are as a human being in harmony, which means the lower aspects under the control of and subservient to the higher, noble aspects. A healthy lifestyle contributes to this. But this is only a prerequisite for keeping healthy our vehicular side. More importantly for us is to focus on our higher thinking aspects. By means of this, the brains are automatically trained and kept in shape. An interesting fact to mention here is the following from the English Wikipedia. Of the many symptoms of Alzheimer, one is mentioned predominant there. This symptom continues throughout the course of the disease, and that symptom is apathy, loss of interest in your environment, and the ability to empathize with others. To empathize with others, to be there for others, is a typical quality of the higher self. Apathy, therefore, is an indication that the higher self has withdrawn and is hidden in the background. Therefore, keep keen interest in your fellow man, be involved, and keep on amazing yourself. You are never too old to learn, and you will discover you can practice this literally to the last day of your life. Finally, we want to reflect on the phenomenon of the terminal lucidity, which is closely associated with dementia. It is the phenomenon that people who for years were senile or suffering from mental illness, in the last days or hours of their lives, suddenly have a clear mind and often regain access to their memory. According to current science, this cannot be possible, because how can a clear mind arise from a damaged brain? Yet it is a phenomenon that has been described already by the ancient Greeks, and a very recently published research from Bruce Grayson and the German biologist Michael Nahm shows it occurs rather regularly in dementia. One of the examples of this study describes a 92-year-old woman who had the diagnosis Alzheimer for 9 years and could not recognize her immediate family members, including her own son. However, 24 hours before she died, she suddenly recognized them again and also knew how old she was and where she was. This example is no exception, and maybe you have experienced something similar in your own environment. Returning now to the dying process, we can now understand why this phenomenon is no exception, and to what phase in the process terminal lucidity corresponds. Indeed, it is a prelude to the clear consciousness that we experience in the panoramic vision. Before someone goes through his actual panoramic vision, he already can, one could say, grow into it. The connection with the higher thinking aspects of man is strengthened once more, and there is a temporary possibility for these aspects to manifest in the person who suffers from dementia. It is a preliminary phase of the panoramic vision, and experienced nurses know very well such a revival and mental clarity announces dying. Literature also describes an example of a man suddenly just before his death talking in a foreign language. This language turned out to be the language of his home country that he had left in his early childhood, before he mastered that language. How it was possible he suddenly was reminiscent of this language will become clear in the next lecture. None of these examples we have given you describing a clear consciousness and perception in a period of brain failure or of serious brain damage in the case of dementia are explained by the current materialistic view that consciousness is located in and arises from the brain. The vision we are presenting in this symposium, that consciousness is the causal force behind the manifestation, gives, according to us, a logical explanation. Our brain, which itself again consists of consciousness of a lower nature, is just a tool that serves as a link to be able to express ourselves in the outer realm and acquire experiences. Consider this view to look at this matter from the perspective of consciousness as a hypothesis. Do examine its value yourself. in particular its ethical value. In our experiences, it is a hypothesis that does increase our understanding of the processes in nature, a hypothesis of which we believe, and the a priori denial closes the doors for these deeper insights. The unbiased conclusion of the researchers Grayson and Naam was that more research is needed into the specific phenomenon of terminal lucidity. But this requires an open attitude and courage to look beyond the first materialistic glasses. It is with the third pair of glasses, when we use our higher thinking consciousness, that we are able to do this unprejudiced research, and, as we have demonstrated, this higher part never perishes. It is that part of us that is always there, as the source we can always draw from, when we tune in, or resonate with, as we have heard this morning. How we can do this is what we are going to explore the rest of the afternoon.
Goed, dames en heren.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, any questions about what Bouke has taught us? Yeah, this is a question, but maybe a remark or a reflection. Why dementia is so widespread? Why is dementia so widespread? You see a kind of a lot of people who now suffer from dementia. Could we say something about why in this period, in our time, it's more often and more widespread than before? Actually, I don't really have an idea. I really thought about this myself. My intuition, my idea is that people are older than 100 years ago. So I also know younger people of 52 that already have starting symptoms. These are things that are speculative. We didn't really research this, but you could say something about the general lifestyle, use of alcohol, use of drugs. This doesn't really stimulate an active consciousness. So there are changes on the vehicle that we need to express these qualities of consciousness. That's one. Then the use of chemicals. This widespread as well is maybe also a cause that makes us degrade in the biological sense and makes it more difficult to keep our bodies healthy. Could it also be a kind of a sentiment not to enjoy life anymore? It might be. I had colleagues of 45 already said, well, I'm not that interested anymore. Yeah, that's already a point where you see that the interest diminishes. So then already a process starts of withdrawal. Expressions like, well, I don't have my time.
A quick last question. There has been research, and there's a direct relationship between diabetes 2, which
there's a relationship between dementia and diabetes caused by old age. There are a lot of dementia patients that take sugar, and we have a different diet, and this could be a cause of early dementia. But I have a question on Devachan. You said that's like a paradise. It's a completely different reality. When you're there, you're not returning. Yes, there are people that take a long time before they return.
Or you have to return whether you like it or not. You can compare it with waking up early in the morning. Waking up in the morning, whether you like it or not, you wake up. You have built up an affinity with this outer world. And it's that attraction to this life, to learn new lessons and meet your friends and to go on where you have been. And it's inevitable to get back until, of course, you have fully exhausted all the ties with this life. And then you will not come back. Well, the idea is pretty simple. It depends on the attraction you have built up on that plane of consciousness. Well, it's like with a holiday. You like your holiday and you enjoy yourself, but after a while you come to the point that you want to go back. It's the same as well with waking up in the morning. You want to stay in bed for a whole day, but at a certain moment you get tired of that and you wake up and you start your daily life. We complain about the outer world, but we still like it, and we are related to it, and so there is a balance between attraction, the outer world, and the Devachan. If I understand it correctly, then you choose yourself to switch between the dreamless sleep to this daily life. But it happens that there are children who are consciousness who had second thoughts of being active again. Well, that's a little bit more complex than we think. You have to realize we have something like cause and effect. So there are causes there, and it's very sad that something like that happens, and it's. But if there have been karmic reasons, of course, then something like this can happen, unfortunately. It's very sad, but it's not for nothing. The higher nature has the experience, and at that particular moment, a very tiny moment, he will have a look back and see the karmic consequences. So he will draw his conclusions, and next time perhaps he will find a better place with a better pair of parents. It's very difficult to explain. Because you have to be aware of the specific situations, and it's even more complex. But it's not only the reincarnation of one person, but it's also, it depends on the parents. It's a very complex case. From a theoretical point of view, it's simple, but practical, the karmic consequences are very difficult to understand.
We heard about the natural dying process. What is the difference between the unnatural dying process? For instance, an accident or euthanasia. Yes, it is definitely different. Please, Herman, I don't really feel comfortable to take up this challenge. What we should realize when there is an accident or euthanasia, what happens is the outer body is taken away. But you just heard from Bouke that we are much more than just the outer body. All that lives in the higher realms still exists. It's a complete human being, except for the body. But the body is not the most important. So these persons keep living on the other levels until their energy has exhausted. For instance, you're 85 and there's euthanasia, but you would have lived normally until 86. You still live on for 1 year, but if you die at 25 for an accident, then you would have lived until 25 years more, you stay for 25 years in that other realm. This, for instance, in the astral realm or in other higher realms where we are active. Those are those dream states that we can be in. What happens during these 45 years? How do you experience time then? Well, what is time? Now it's almost 11:45. At the dentist, 5 minutes is very long, but over a romantic table, it's gone by in a second. In a semi-dreamy state, time, we experience it differently. Therefore, we are not enthusiastic about euthanasia and things like that. You can better have people here than you can communicate. We cannot communicate with them with the inner realms, because they only left their body. And a lot of people think there's no problem anymore, but that's not true.
That is something which goes more slowly. If you look around in nature, palliative sedation, okay, pick it up again. These are things where you have to realize, depending on your own ethics and morality, how you look at consciousness and to this world. It can be, I have gone through this personally, my time is over, and it's over, and I do not need any treatments, I only drink, and I decide myself when I go away. And that's a very respectful situation. But of course, you need a positive life of vision. Yeah. If you have much pain, pain is very sad, and it would be very sensible to have a slow. That is, consciousness is not going in all kinds of directions with morphine. That's not a very pleasant situation. And then you can do it more gradually with all kind of other techniques, that you keep it at a certain level that the pain is not that bad. But I have seen that it's not so very long ago, a very well advanced situation of cancer, very painful, very spiritual person. He knows a lot. He stopped with eating, he didn't drink a lot, not very much pain, and very comfortable way he passed away. But it depends on his vision. Are you thinking that this life is only once? Then you want to stay here as long as possible. If you know that there is another reincarnation coming, why should I stay here having pain for another month? Let me go for a rest and go into Devachan. The decision you do not take if that's not your vision on life. For that reason, we put so many value on this workshop. Studying is one thing, but practicing is the other. Yeah, Bouke was very peaceful. Thank you very much. Liked the lecture very much. It helped me a lot. What would happen if in the middle of life, 5 minutes a day, you resonate on your own dying process? It just appeared to me what would happen then. Of course, there is some fear. It's very sensible. Very sensible, very wise. We usually say it in a different way. What happens is the quintessence of dying is the review, panoramic review, the drawing your lessons out of it. Why don't you do that at the end of every day before you go to sleep? Sleep and death are twins, actually. We do it. If you feel yourself sleepy, you go to bed, and well, it's quite natural to look back at the day and look what happened and try for yourself, try to put the spiritual balance there. Well, the nice thing about that, the better you can do that every day, the better it will be for your panoramic vision at the end of your life, and the better you can start your new life. Use it or lose it. Well, he likes it very much. Yeah, we know what to do now. Well, if you tell it a little bit differently, it sounds more pleasant. Yeah, Bouke? we remove you now from the platform. Thank you very much.
We gaan de ochtend